Yes? No?
Yeah,
Kinda?
we got it.
Okay. All right. Excellent. All right. So this is my first attempt at this, and this is weird. So maybe we're getting joined by people live. If not, they can watch the recording later. So what we're talking about today, hopefully what those videos primed you for, was we're going to be talking about ethical considerations. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been looking at all of these incredible things that we can do with Photoshop and digital imaging. And I like using this. With great power comes great responsibility. So and I think that applies to this. There's some things that you guys need to understand about your digital images, and that's why we started with those two videos. We're going to start with ethics, and then we're going to work into copyright issues. I have a couple of different presentations that I'm sharing with you guys today. Ethically, there's a number of considerations. What we're going to be examining is when we manipulate an image, is that apparent to our audience? And if it's not apparent to our audience, what then ethically do we need to understand and do for our audience? When we do something like this, when we manipulate a photograph and we create an illustration like this, it's pretty clear that this is a digital manipulation. There's no camera that can do this. At least I missed that model of the Polaroid anyway. So I mean, when we have an illustration that is to this level, it's generally accepted that this is artwork. But other photographs, it might not be so obvious. So here you are, you're in a class. This is in the context of a digital imaging class. These images are edited, but how are they edited? And the conversation I want to have here is I want to try and have you guys point out what you think's been edited, and then talk about whether or not you believe that an average person would understand these have been edited. Okay? So in this image, what do you think of this image? Okay, the sun's huge, Matt says. I have to repeat everything. Otherwise, we would have had to have a roving mic. Anyone else?
Shadows.
The shadows, what about them?
They're really defined.
Okay, so you think that the shadows are unrealistic?
Yeah, there's a lot of definition to it.
In some way or another, those shadows are unrealistic. Okay, what else? Anyone else? Don't be afraid.
Probably the sky.
Okay,
The color.
the sky, the color. Okay. And I like to do this not only to show you guys what's going on, but also to kind of pick out, like, we kind of, after a while with some experience in digital imaging, we start to pick out things in photos that we think are manipulated, but in some cases they're really not. It was actually 3 images composited. The sky did look like that. The sun did look like that after a fashion. And what's really going on here is a couple of things. I had 2 photographs of one buck that I layered in the image twice in the foreground. And then I didn't like, we're going to talk about composition next week, but we have this thing called rule of thirds. I didn't like that the sun was in the center of the image, so I cut the leftmost portion of the image and moved it to the right so that my composition was a little more pleasing. And really, the real question is here, your mom, your grandma, if they looked at that original image, what would they think of that image? Would they accept that image without question? Would they be skeptical? Now, in this day and age, people are getting more savvy when it comes to this. There are actually a lot. I in average day-to-day conversation, will actually have people say, "Oh, I'm pretty sure that's photoshopped." But we have to think about that. We have to be careful with it. This one's really subtle, and this is kind of speaks to folks who are going to be a little crazy about what you're allowed to do with digital imaging. No one? No takers? Okay, the reason why I like to show this one is because there are people who actually have difficulty with any sort of digital editing. There are actually some photographers who would take serious issue with this image. And all that happened here was the foreground was cut and flipped. In some of my other classes, you will hear me talk about how images have movement. We have this quality to photographs called vector. And in this case, I was using this photograph on the Wyoming State Highway map. And I wanted the buffalo to go the other direction. So I cut the photograph and flipped the buffalo. And in this instance, I believe that, you know, it was probably okay ethically. I was making an artistic judgment. I wasn't necessarily moving mountains, just a hillside. Just a hillside. But there are a lot of photographers who would absolutely say, this is absolutely wrong, you do not do this, period. And there are, and in some instances, I think that, you know, you would have to be more careful. Would I do this and put this photograph into a newspaper? I probably would have thought a lot differently about that. This one you have to take my word for because I don't have the original images. And it's actually the same goose repeated 4 times. And again, you know, it's a subtle manipulation, but you know, we are in a sense altering reality with these images. And again, so those 3 images, do you know a fair amount of people that would have accepted any of those images as just a photograph straight out of the camera? And you're all looking at me like, I don't know. I don't know anyone that looks at photography. What are you talking about, O'Brien? All right. Good discussion. And I would argue that obviously there are quite a few people who would believe that these images were as they were. And the uses that these images were created, I believe, were ethically okay. But I show you these to illustrate how easily we can create images with digital editing software that alters reality. And while in these cases it's not altering reality to the point where, you know, we're putting, you know, Jane Fonda and John Kerry together, or worse, as you'll see with some of the other examples that we have, we have to be aware of the responsibilities that we have to the people that we are creating these images for. There's an NPPA statement, and it's actually going to be on, I'm not going to make you guys read this right now. It'll be on Angel for you guys. You can actually take a quick read of it. The reason why I like to show you this is to illustrate a couple of things. One of which is that, you know, this should be a consideration for us. There are professional organizations that take this very seriously, but I like to use this statement, this ethics statement, for a couple of reasons. One of which is it doesn't speak enough to the changes that you can make and where that line is. And when I say where that line is, so much of what we're going to talk about today is very gray. When we talk about ethics, there's no clear line in some cases where, you know, I've now gone too far, or, you know, I need to stop. I need to you know, I've taken this photograph too far, and it now pushes beyond the bounds of what's acceptable. It's very difficult to find that point, and it's really there's a lot of personal judgment, and there's also some context that we have to consider with these issues. So let's look at what we're talking about here. What it says is that essentially what this breaks down to is that anything that you can do in the darkroom is generally okay. You can remove blemishes. You can optimize tonal range, but the key is that, of course, anything that changes reality is out of bounds. 2 keys here. One, this term, anything that changes, a sentence, anything that changes reality is out of bounds for photography. This is actually a pretty clear statement. But where I feel like it's still a little convoluted is this: anything you could normally do in a darkroom is generally okay. When we watched that video, and I'm trying to think of, I can't remember his first name, but Fareed, Professor Fareed, what did he talk about? as far as did digital imaging just show up when we had Photoshop? No. Well, there are numbers and numbers of examples that this kind of manipulation has been going on, like he said, since we've had photography. There are actually books that are written all about how politicians, political regimes have used photography, and they actually they compare all these photographs, and in some cases the photographs have several evolutions. There's one photograph and it may have actually been the photo of Stalin they showed, where they show the original image, and there's maybe 10 people in the image. And then they show all subsequent versions of the image. And it's literally, they edited the photograph every time someone fell out of favor with Stalin. I mean, there's 6 or 7 versions of this photograph rolling around. So this really doesn't have a lot to do with what can be in the done in the darkroom and what can be done with digital imaging. Because what we've been able to do in the darkroom has given us the ability to significantly manipulate images for more than 100 years in some cases. The real crux of this is anything that changes reality is out of bounds for, and then I have in quotes, photography, and we'll get to what that means in a moment. I want to look at this site here and show you some examples. And I won't go touch on each of these, but these are photographs that have been used in situations that, these are not coffee table books. This is not art. This is not artistic license. These are photographs that appeared in newspapers in some cases, and I think hopefully will illustrate why this is important. So here we have an image at the top left here. This is an image that actually went over wire services around the world and was picked up by several newspapers. A savvy photo editor picked up on an abnormality with the photograph and called some people on it. And they did actually find that it was a manipulated image. The 2 original images are what we see below. And as you can see, the photograph really changed, the way the photograph was edited really changes the context. So we have an image where we have the soldier and he appears to be in a somewhat threatening position. And there's a gentleman further back just standing up and his head's turned away, he's a little further away. And then we have this subsequent image, and the soldier's body language is much different in the second image. This is not threatening body language at all. And the man is closer with the child. The 2 images together, the way they were composited, really tell a very different story than the original images told. And this is something that obviously people would be upset about. Now our soldiers are over there and they're threatening parents and children as opposed to what really happened. So this is a big issue. This is very important. I mean, this is a situation where digitally manipulating this image absolutely did alter reality and could essentially put the soldier in false light, made this situation look far more tense, worse than it actually was. And this is one of those situations where the photographer was fired. Here's the Newsweek example that they talked about in the video with, the Time magazine cover that Mahurin was talking about. Here's a cover that got some attention that kind of speaks to, where ethically that line is. So here we have the couple that had 7 kids, septuplets. And Newsweek, not because they wanted to, make the photograph look somehow more dramatic, but I think that probably the photo editor thought that he was doing this lady a favor, edited her teeth. Her teeth, the actual teeth, are on the right. They weren't very sightly. And so he took the liberty of fixing her teeth. And this created a lot of uproar with people. So, and this is again, this is context, and this is people's personal feelings on this. Some people are going to be more sensitive to this than others. This is an example from this is from the Kent State shooting, and really it's not a whole lot going on here. We just had the removal of a post. You can see in the image at top, but so this is probably more of a compositional issue, but in a photo like this, is there any context in which it's okay to manipulate the image? A rather famous example, National Geographic, and this speaks to the whole, digital issue. A lot of these photos actually do as well, the ones before that you just had seen. But this image here was from 1982. We did not have Photoshop in 1982. National Geographic had this really wonderful photograph of the pyramids. The problem was it was a horizontal, and National Geographic is, of course, vertical, the cover. They wanted to use it for the cover. So they actually cut one of the pyramids and moved it so that it appeared that the pyramids were closer than they were. And there were, of course, people who had been there and had seen those pyramids and called them on it, said, I don't think that's exactly what that looks like. And it was a pretty big uproar. There were a lot of folks who were upset that a magazine like National Geographic would edit a photograph like this. The editor did try to play it off. He said that if the photographer had moved a little bit to his right, that would have been the image that he would have gotten. So, but he didn't. Again, here's some really blatant, ridiculous examples. This is an example. Castro and Clinton did meet. There was no photographer. They're not actually right next to each other, holding their hands out to shake hands. But to the average person, does this sort of thing seem reasonable? I mean, they sell all kinds of copies with Bat Boy on the cover. God knows what else would people believe. Here's another one. I love this one, actually. George Bush and Saddam Hussein. Again, never happened, never took place. Total fabrication. This is a rather famous image of where they took Oprah's head, put it on Anne Margaret's body. And then this one's pretty silly. This is pretty ridiculous. And this one's, it's tough to tell. What do you see going on there? Anyone? Chris is bobbing his head. You don't have a microphone. You don't have to be afraid.
That black guy doesn't look like
Okay, yeah. Okay, and he's absolutely right. And this is an example of someone editing an image in such a way that is so silly and irresponsible. And you go from a situation where you believe that perhaps you're trying to do something good, and you get a nasty, black eye over it. So they had these two photographs. So the young man was at the event, but someone looked at the photographs that they were going to use on the cover of this magazine and said, you know what? We need some diversity in this photo. We need some diversity on this. We want people to know that we're not just a crowd of white people. And it backfired. Just terrible. So back to when it's okay, when it's not okay. Where this leaves us. We can manipulate images in such a way that the average person may not have any idea that we've manipulated the image. Now, there's all kinds of terrible examples where it's blatantly obvious that an image has been manipulated, but there's probably a number of photographs that you've looked at that you accepted as reasonable that were actually manipulated. When is it okay and when is it not okay? The guideline I'm going to give you, of course, because like I said, this is a gray area. There's no clear line, is going to have to do with context. If we are working in a capacity that is journalistic, if we are creating images that are going to have some sort of historical significance, some historical impact. You know, newspapers, they're kept, they're archived, people look back at them. This is how history is written in some cases. Obviously, this is a far more stringent guideline. This is much more important than some other considerations. So in journalistic uses, if you are calling something a photograph, if you are treating something as a photograph, the amount of digital manipulation that is considered acceptable is very small. You have to be very careful. You can manipulate the tonal qualities of the image. You can sharpen an image, maybe. You can clean a little bit up in the image. You cannot move people in an image. You cannot, manipulate the image to the point where it no longer represents what happened in reality. And this is a big key here. Truth and reality. If we manipulate the photograph to the point where it no longer represents truth, if we are misrepresenting reality, this is where we have now a great concern, particularly in this sort of treatment. Now, obviously, there are a number of situations in which digital manipulation would be considered more acceptable. Two of the examples that I showed you before were for art prints. These are prints that people put on their wall. This is a photograph that's going to go on, into a book that's going to sit on a coffee table. This is a completely different situation. So we have some artistic license, depending on when this is. Now, all of you have seen images in newspapers that you know are not representations of reality. How do newspapers deal with that? What they should be doing at that point is they are no longer calling the image a photograph. They are representing the image, calling the image an illustration. They are illustrating something. They're acknowledging that this has been digitally manipulated in some way that essentially alters reality. And in most cases, when you see this in a newspaper, it's fairly obvious. They've really taken some liberties with images. We don't get a whole lot into the issue of libel. You learn about that in other courses that we teach here. But in some cases, you can actually get into trouble with the law over the way you manipulate an image. If you misrepresent what's been going on in a photograph, what's happened in a photograph, and you've done it purposely to hurt someone, and it does in fact hurt that person, and they can prove that you did it to purposely hurt them, and it did in fact hurt them, they can sue you for what is called libel. And it's not good. And the example I always give is let's see, Sean works at the animal shelter, and I don't like Sean. He said some unflattering things about me, regardless of whether or not they are true, because Sean's like that. He says unflattering things about people, and so to get back at him, I think to myself, well, how can I get back at Sean? You know what? He works at the animal shelter. I bet you if I take a picture of Sean playing soccer, which Sean is a former soccer player, and then I take a picture of a dog, all I got to do is just put the dog in front of Sean. It looks like a completely different photo. No longer is Sean playing soccer. He's now kicking a dog. So I manipulate this image and I put this image out there somehow, and then Sean's boss says, "Oh man, Sean, this is bad. You're kicking dogs." And Sean, of course, he swears up and down that it didn't happen, but he has a photograph right there in front of him that shows that yes, in fact, it did. And Sean's fired. Sean could actually sue me for libel and demonstrate, if he can demonstrate, I should say, if he can demonstrate that, one, it's not true that I digitally manipulated the image. Two, I did it on purpose because I didn't like him. I had malicious intent, and I think there's actually another case. I think there's 4 things, but only three are coming to mind right now. 3, that I actually did harm him, that he in fact lost his job, he lost his livelihood, it cost him money, he's out of his house and home, he can't support his kids and all of his puppies that he had adopted from the animal shelter before they fired him. He would actually successfully be able to sue me for libel. So, and hopefully no one is going to do anything that silly, but you should be aware of it. Can't get away with that kind of thing. The next thing I want to talk about, and I might take a break before we get into it because it's a long section, is copyright. So we've gotten a primer on ethics. Now I want to talk about copyright. So let's do. Now I'm going to do something. I'm going to give you like an odd number now. You have 6 minutes. Not 5 minutes or 10 minutes because of Matt now. Yeah, let's come back at 10 till, and we'll start again and go ahead and stop and stop.